Hey everyone, thank you for tuning in. I'm Ahmed Uganoon, Senior Content Producer for Mining Indaba, leading on our government, investment and junior content programs. As part of Indaba's burgeoning Digital Diaries series and in continuation of June's theme of human rights in mining, the team is delighted to present an interview with Jeff Quartermaine, CEO of Perseus Mining. Conducted by our Head of Content, Laura Cornish, the interview will dive into the story of Perseus, offering listeners a unique peer-to-peer learning opportunity as we explore Perseus's approach to human rights. Specifically, we will explore the means of community interaction and engagement Perseus has undertaken, the disruptive means of delivering tangible contributions at the local level through utility and infrastructure access, collaborating with local leaders to deliver reinvestment initiatives for long-lasting benefication, and how other industry peers can embrace the drive to support these communities and improve their livelihoods. Be sure to let us know your thoughts and stay tuned next month for our newest digital theme, technology. Take a look.
Cool, Jeff, thank you so much for joining me. It's really good to have you online with me and talking about a topic of real great relevance to the mining sector, human rights. Nice to see you.
Yes, nice to be here. Thanks a lot.
So, Jeff, the topic of human rights can be viewed from many different angles. But in this particular instance, I do want to explore community interaction and engagement. With two mines in two different countries and a potential prospect in a third, Jeff, what has been your overall experience in managing communities' expectations so that they don't feel they have been treated unfairly?
Yes, look, it's a very good question, this, and I think actually managing expectations is probably the largest ongoing challenge we have in the community relations space, and it's one of these things we need to manage it at all four of our sites, and we need to do it on a constant basis, and each of them has their own nuances. So this is, the response in the area is definitely not a one size fits all. I mean, it's often the result of, people are well-meaning by and large, and it's often the result of, or their expectations are often the result of, lack of attention from governments over a long period of time, and they see it as, when a mining company turns up, this is an opportunity to, to get a lot of the things that they've wanted for a long time. So it is very difficult because we simply, we can't do all of those things. I think probably the biggest area of managing expectations is in the area of employment, because people would like to have 100% of the community employed, and that's something which we simply can't do. Can't do for a number of reasons. One is you can't afford to employ all of those people, but also two, not everybody has the skill sets that are required for what we do. But we do try to do the best we can. But it's really important, though, not to become seen as something like a surrogate government. I think, that is the risk, that you replace the government, but that's not our role. What our role is to make sure that when we leave, and we will leave one day, that the community's in much better condition than when we arrived, and that's something that is a major focus in the area. And you might say, well, okay, so how do you do it? What are the mechanisms around doing it? Well, I think the very first thing we seek to do when we go to a new site is to set up a community consultative committee and make sure that, to the best of our ability, it's representative of all of the communities. Now, that can be a bit of a challenge because, people being people, they'll try to jump the queue, as it were, at times, and things like that. But we have to leave the election of members of that committee to the communities, and hopefully they will be representative, and hopefully they'll be responsible in representing their constituencies. We also have very, very active, well, actually in Ghana, what do we call it? Social development department. In Côte d'Ivoire, it's community relations departments. But we have very active departments who are in constant dialogue with our host communities, and it's not all about altruism here. This is self-interest, because we'd recognise very strongly that if our communities are pleased with us being in their presence, when our workers, most of whom come from those communities, go home at night, they feel comfortable about working for us, and then when they come back the next day, they work hard for us. Now, if they go home and hear from the communities that we're bad employers and the like, well, they're going to have a very different attitude. So, there is an element of self-interest on our part, but we do genuinely try to improve the places where we go to. We also do things like fund through different types of mechanisms. So in all of the places the governments require a specific, trust fund to be established from which various community projects get funded. But we also do a lot of funding off our own bat, and our own funding is perhaps more nuanced in the sense that it might be contributing to cultural events or things that are important to the to the individual communities rather than to the district and things like that. But it's all underpinned by people treating people with respect, I think. We are different. We need to identify the differences. We need to respect those differences, and we need to work together, as I say, to produce a better place. Now, we have a very clearly defined sense of values. We have corporate values that are inviolable to us, but within that framework or constraint, we will bend our model to accommodate cultural differences and things of that nature. So it is about respect. It's about recognizing that one size doesn't fit all, and it's about trying to ensure, as I say, that when we leave the place, it's in better shape than what we found it. And I think it's fair to say that at our sites, we're reasonably comfortable that we will be able to say that based on progress made to date.
So Jeff, what's obviously clear, and I think the audience would agree, managing community expectations and working with them is a complex situation and requires understanding on a case-by-case basis, so to speak, or particularly around the country that you're operating. But I did enjoy you using the word respect. I think that is a key word when we consider human rights in the areas that we operate. So I appreciate that, Jeff, and really on point. I think perhaps the mining industry does have a bit of a bad reputation when it comes to human rights, and we don't focus enough on the good things that we are doing. And I know we've already started on this conversation about some of the great work that Perseus is doing. But if we look at human rights in terms of access to basic vital necessities like water and improved living conditions, are these areas that Perseus also plays in?
Oh, no, for sure. Look, I mean, that just goes to the basic issue of respect. I mean, for instance, clearly access to drinking water is a very obvious one, and we do things like making sure that there are suitable water bores in the areas, dams, etc., to make sure that people can get that access. One of the things that seriously does irritate us, so I must admit, is when we do actually provide that infrastructure, and then we see some of the communities granting access to illegal miners who come in and then immediately set about polluting waterways. I mean, that is something that we do find a little bit challenging at times. But no, access to basic human rights is obvious. I mean, water's one. I mean, we also work at providing access to medical assistance, so building clinics, maternity centres, things of that nature, providing access to education by building local schools, and also funding scholarships and things like that. Access to basic hygiene during the COVID pandemic, for instance, that was something we did quite a lot of, where we work with the communities to provide basic materials, but also go out and spray and things of that nature to make sure that as a community, their health standards were such that COVID didn't become an issue. And in fact, that I won't say it's all because of us. I think there's a lot of factors involved, but certainly the incidence of COVID in our host communities was fairly modest, so that was a good thing. But no, look, that's it's fairly fundamental, I think, to the overall process, to look at those basic human rights and make sure that people's lives are improved.
Thanks, Jeff. Good to know that even on those levels, Perseus is getting involved in helping its communities, despite the challenges, right? There's not a day that we don't experience some challenge, I suppose, in the mining industry. But let me circle back to mine closure. Jeff, you've raised that point a few times already. It's easy to manage communities and support them when you're operating the mine in the area, but what do you do when you close your mine? How do you ensure that some of the things you've introduced are not compromised or forgotten when you do leave your mine or when you do close it?
Well, look, I mean, honestly, we can't control what people think we can't control what people think, period, but we certainly can't influence when we're not there. But what we do tend to do is try to look for, as part of the community programs, try to look for initiatives that will last well beyond our tenure in the area. What usually happens is that one of the first things that does happen is a community development plan will be established, and in consultation with the communities, a program of works is set out, and that program of works is funded through a percentage of our revenue going into trust funds, etc., etc. Now, we are quite specific, and in fact, this is really a requirement of the legislation in most instances, not to dictate to people what we think they should have. It has to come and be self-generated, but we do try to guide in some areas. For instance, what we found is that there is a very strong orientation towards having us provide infrastructure such as the schools or clinics or meeting centres and things of that nature. But we also set about trying to persuade the communities to include livelihood programs such that, when we do leave, then people are engaged in industry that started under our watch that can continue and employ people after we've left. And I'm talking about, home industries, agricultural initiatives, things of that nature, because those are the sorts of things that are going to last well beyond us being there. I think other things, include trying to get people to engage in environmental management in their own way. And one of the big scourges of Africa, as I'm sure that you know, is the introduction of plastic water bottles and plastic bags for water, where people tend to, dispose of them wherever they finish the contents, and creates a heck of a mess all over the place. Now, what we try to do in certain instances is to encourage people to manage that waste in a more effective way, where it's not strewn around the place and can be disposed of as best we can. But look, it's a bit of an ongoing challenge. As I say, we're not there to dictate to people to say this is how you should lead your life, or at best what we can do is encourage and guide. But we do definitely have an orientation to try and leave projects in place that will last well beyond mine closure when that occurs. I might say we haven't closed the mine as yet, so this is still a bit of a theoretical concept in a sense, but no, most certainly it needs to be taken into account.
Thanks, Jeff. So I want to take a bit of a step back, and you've touched on this, but I want to explore it a little further. Industry knows that Perseus Mining is considering a project in Sudan, and we know about the challenges, but I think in the long term, it's a great prospect. For other mining companies or for juniors that are starting on this journey, like you are in Sudan, exploring the potential to open a new mine, what is the starting point? What are the key things you need to start with from a community perspective when you come into a new country, particularly one that's not intensive in mining? What are the elements that are top of mind when you start in that country?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, and there's a lot of things that need to be considered. I mean, we were very intent, first of all, when we went there, in establishing strong relationships with government and credibility with governments around, we do what we say we're going to do, and helping them to understand actually what we plan to do. I mean, there is very, very, very little large-scale mining. In fact, there's virtually no large-scale mining in Sudan. So what we did do was actually took the opportunity when we were being visited by the Africa Down Under conference here in Australia. We took a number of key government representatives around to see what large-scale mining operations actually look like, how they impact local areas, and also the benefits that do accrue from some of these mining operations. Obviously, where I live in Western Australia, there's quite a lot of mining in the state, so there were places where we could easily take the government people and show them what we were doing. So I think that was very helpful, because they really had very little understanding of the scale of what it was that we were proposing. And I think once those government people really, got to understand what it was we were talking about, then that made things a whole lot easier as we move forward. Now, if we zero in down into at the community level, that was a really interesting thing, because and we've learned a lot of lessons on that score. Now, when we acquired the property, the previous vendors said to us, well, there is no community relations because there's no villages around you, and where our mine is located is in the middle of the Sahara Desert. You've got to drive for a day or two to come across communities, as it were. So unlike West Africa, where we're surrounded by villages, that wasn't the case in Sudan. However, there were traditional communities, traditional tribes that actually did have traditional ownership of that land, unbeknownst to us, and they came out once we got established and were very keen to claim their entitlements, as it were. Now, that was actually made quite challenging in the sense that the tribes had not been treated well by the previous governments who had this is going back quite some time, basically taken this traditional land and given ownership to people, and had never compensated the traditional owners. So they were coming to us to say, well, we would like to get some compensation for what we lost, and we've had to work our way through that process. Now, that is actually where it became quite interesting, because one of the groups did have towns they weren't right near us, but they were within a reasonable distance of the proposed mine site, and we were able to talk to them about building the sorts of things that we do in West Africa, so infrastructure, etc., and they were very keen for that to occur, and we're actually about to sign an agreement with that group, I think, almost any day now. So that's been very, very encouraging. The other tribe that spoke to us, after a while, they weren't very interested in engaging at all, except they wanted money. And after working hard to open up communications, what we discovered was they said, well, look, it's no good to us building, you're talking about building schools or hospitals, because we're a nomadic group. We don't have any towns. We move around the desert, basically. So it was like, oh, that's interesting. So it meant that we would need to think about what kind of model might actually suit, where they could gain some benefit from us being on their land, but not in the way that we had traditionally done it. So one of the ideas that's come up, which I like particularly, is establishing some form of Islamic banking arrangement where, as herders, if somebody needs to buy animals for their flocks and things like that, they can borrow money on the basis of doing that and then repay in kind, or however the Arabic banking system works at a later stage. But it provides the opportunity for people to be able to develop their livelihood and gain some serious benefit from us being on their traditional land. So it's been a really interesting exercise. We're a long way from being settled in all of those things. As people are well aware, Sudan at the moment has a few challenges, and hopefully these things will settle down in the fullness of time. But certainly, as we get going in the country, we're going to be working very closely with host communities, or at least tribal groups. We're going to be working very closely with host governments. And I'm sure that what we will ultimately deliver will make a major contribution, not only at an economic or an economy level, but at a local level as well, because that is terribly important, that people actually benefit from us being in their presence.
Again, Jeff, just the complexities of some of the things you need to work with. Dealing with nomads, an absolutely unique challenge that I haven't heard of before, and fascinating to see how you've embraced that. Jeff, if we can close out our interview, you've covered a lot of wonderful things that Perseus does around its mines for its communities. Is there any other key great projects that really demonstrate, in particular, Perseus's respect for inherent human rights around with their communities? Anything else that you'd like to share?
Well, look, we've done a lot of different things over time, and it takes all sorts of different forms. I mean, if I think of the things that we've just done in the last few months that I'm really pleased about, one is this rubbish collection and environmental management exercise that we have done in a couple of villages around Yaouré. When we had our board come visit us not so long ago, we went for a drive around the villages, and some of our directors were rather taken aback by the way that disposal of rubbish was handled in the community, and were pretty shocked actually. And we set about thinking about what can we actually do. Now, what we did do in the short term was we organised our people to go and help help doing a cleanup through the villages. But in the longer term, what we're aiming to do is the University at Yamoussoukro, they have one of the schools in the university is waste management, and we've been very keen in setting up the community development program that they actually include the construction of a waste disposal unit in the area, and then partner with the university to use that facility as a model that they can use with their students, and at the same time encourage local people to get involved in active waste management. So that's something that is something that hopefully will last well beyond our presence in the community, and is something that we're really looking forward to that working very well. I mean, other things that we've done, we built a dam up at Fimbiasso the other day to make sure that they've got decent water supply, not only for drinking, but also for management of crops and the like, which I think also in the fullness of time will have a lasting benefit. And then, of course, we get involved in Ghana at Edikan. We recently, on my last visit over there, we participated in the handover of a rather large truck stop and market for local women to use with all of their products, and that sort of provides a central place for people to conduct business. But very importantly, it also takes them off the street so that they're not subject to traffic accident and things of that nature. So hopefully that'll help to help them preserve life, but also give them a central focus for their community. So they're three sort of fairly small things, one at each of the mines that we have engaged in the last 3 months, that I think represent the sort of work that we do and represent the sorts of benefits that can accrue to community by working collaboratively with mining companies who want to operate in their presence.
Jeff, just an absolute acknowledgement for all the wonderful things that you're doing. I don't think mining companies are acknowledged to the extent and around the work that they do, and Perseus Mining is a great example of how other juniors and industry peers can learn and embrace the excellent work that can be done to support communities and improve their livelihoods. Thank you, Jeff, for taking the time to chat to me. It is a complex subject, but one that we definitely need to talk more about. So I really appreciate your time and for sharing with me. Thank you.
And thank you for giving me the opportunity. And I think, it is something that we are proud of, but I think it's also important that people do learn from others' experience. It doesn't cost a vast amount of money to do these things, but the benefits are quite significant. And thanks very much for giving us the opportunity to highlight some of these things.
Fantastic, Jeff. Thanks so much.